One can believe in immigration. I mean, Dr. Peikoff has suggested that there is a context in which immigration restrictions make sense. So, no, the fact that you're in favor of some border, I'm in favor of a border. Uh, there are some objectivists who really, in effect, don't believe in a border.
Yeah.
Dr. Harry Binswanger. I think I believe in more of a border than he does. I think we have a right to screen for terrorists, criminals, disease, people carrying infectious diseases. So I think we have a right to have a border. And I know there's a difference of opinion among objectivists on that. So no, believing that we should have a border doesn't make you a racist by any means. No, 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 no. If, however, and there are right wingers who say things like it will destroy our culture, the government is not in the business of protecting a culture. That is not a
No,
valid means to exclude people, in my view. Ideology, culture, things like that. Besides, these people are self selecting to become Americans. Before we worried about any of these things, we didn't have systems that, called America evil as you arrive in the door. And so most immigrants would learn English, acculturate. They were eager to join American society. It also self-selects people who are ambitious, right?
don't you
Of
think we
course, the
should?
bigger the welfare state, the less it does that.
Don't you think we should screen for socialists or communists?
Mm, no, not at this stage, not at this in this context. If
What
communism,
context?
if it was, honestly, back in the days of the Cold War, that would have made a lot more sense to me, because we were in effect various wars, cold and hot, against the communists. In a time of war, I think there are For example, during World War II, could we exclude Nazis? Absolutely. Could we restrict Nazi ideological activity, spreading their propaganda? Absolutely. During our conflict with jihadism after 9/11, the idea of a mosque down at ground zero? No effing way. I was with Leonard Peikoff there too. During war, we do not have to sanction the ideology of the country we're at war with. In fact, it's suicide. Now, if we're not at active war with Nazis and communists anymore, then no. No, 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 no. Ideology as such should not be a screen until and unless we are at active war with a nation of that ideology, in my view. I believe that was Rand's position too.
I don't think that socialists declare war anymore. I think they
I
invade your country and try to take it over democratically.
think most immigrants to the United States are not in that category. I don't think
That's
they
why
even
I'm not.
rise to
I'm
the
not.
level of intellectual status where you could call them socialists. They
Well, I'm
come,
certainly not arguing for keeping out all immigrants. I'm saying screen for
I
socialists,
see,
like if
just
they have
screen
a
for the
history.
overt ones. Right, right. If they are informed or overt. Well, no, I still would have to say that I don't think ideology. I think if they were terrorists, I think if they were active insurgents and you had reason to believe that, you could exclude them.
And
I
that's
think
one
if they
reason
had
why
criminal
I think the
records
open
for violence
borders,
and stuff, yeah, we can exclude them.
and that's one reason why I think the open borders view is not viable. I don't
Right.
think you I don't think you can have a country and have an open border.
I don't think a completely open border. I think we do have a right to screen for criminals, terrorists, people who see. Let me take a closer case that we might overlap on. Let's imagine that we have a communist who isn't representing, say, some communist country per se, but we know that he is a violent guy. He's threatened terrorism. That communist can be kept out because he's overtly threatened terrorism or has been part of a violent organization. Yes, they can be kept out. Criminals, terrorists, people who advocate violence, people who advocate terrorism, or people who carry infectious diseases. It's the physical harm or the potential for physical harm. See, rights are rights as Rand defined them, and these include the rights to enter the United States. It has to be based on the physical threat, and that alone gives the government a right to act, in my mind, until and unless a person represents a specific physical threat. That includes in time of war the entire enemy ideology.
Right.
But
I
until and
think that
unless there's a physical threat, the government cannot morally, otherwise they become the initiators of force, right? They become the
right.
rights violators.
So one of the justifications for the Communist Control Act was the fact that communists promote violent revolution. And
Yes.
I think we're in a similar condition now with socialists. They don't promote violent overthrow, they promote democratic overthrow of rights. So they essentially represent an objective threat to individual rights, but they do it through democratic
If it
processes.
is purely ideology and they're willing to work nonviolently within our system, the government has no business screening them out.
But then we're resigning ourselves to becoming socialist.
No, no.
Why not?
Because, as I say, uh, people who come to the United States mostly are not coming to change America into a socialist country, but for their own personal reasons, to escape tyranny, poverty, and to make a better life. And I would still say that the vast majority of immigrants to this country are in that category. Immigrants tend to have a lower crime rate than Native American, native-born American citizens, a lower crime rate,
Yeah.
not a higher one.
I mean, I'm
And
maybe
they also are mixed in their election outcomes. They do tend more to vote Democrat because Republicans are perceived as being anti-immigrant. That's one of the problems. But with winning over immigrants, if Republicans were more pro-immigrant, it would be easier for them to win over immigrants because most of these immigrants aren't coming for ideological corrupting, to subvert America. Some do. Some, I'm not denying that there weren't anarchists in the first part of the 20th century who specifically came to America to undermine it. Or take
there
the
was
Muslim,
something against anarchists in genealogical records. They made you sign something saying you weren't an anarchist.
Yeah, see, and that was it. And there were anarchists who did violence in the earlier part of the 20th century, no question about it. And if you were one of those anarchists who advocated violence, I would say the government could keep you out.
Well,
Right.
the problem with socialists is that they appeal to the masses who want to take from the rich and give to the poor. So if you're going to allow socialists to enter the political arena, they're going to get the votes in a democratic system because most people are not rich.
I think that, well, I don't think that voting always just comes down to I'm getting benefits from the state and therefore I'm going to vote a certain way. I think there's a tendency, and I think that, the James Buchanan Public Interest School of Economics sort of suggests that people will vote with their pocketbooks, and the bigger the group on welfare or dependent on government, the less likely it is you're going to have anything but that political direction. There's something to that. But I really think that there are bigger issues. I think that rich people, for example, will often be the first people to sign up for higher taxes. Limousine liberals. Now, there it's not self-interest at all. It's
well, they may be buying time from the mob.
And there are plenty of poor people who I know who are objectivists, who just because they're not rich would not advocate government programs. So I think that it's simplistic to think that people are simply voting along those lines. I think that the culture war is the important one. I think philosophy is where we're made or broken here.
So James, I understand you have a photographic memory.
I don't. I cannot say I have a photographic memory or an eidetic memory, neither for images or for words. However, I am, my friends are always surprised at the scope of my memory. It is remarkable. I really do need to read or hear something once, and usually that is sufficient to have a crystal clear recollection of it thereafter. But am I capable of confusion and error in my memory? Oh, yes. And so I rely on writing and books and my own notes, contemporary notes, to clear up my own memory on things very frequently. On the other hand, it's a question of salience, importance, relevance. If it's not important to me, it's almost as though I make an effort to forget it. I can't clutter my mind with that. And so I will, what I can do is give my mind an instruction to remember something that always works. And so in the field of history, which has been my field for, I've been buried in history books now for more than 30 years in doing Creating Christ. And historians, other scholars, friends will just remark on the astonishing, and it's just a fact about, I've certain real clear natural gifts and certain real clear not so natural gifts, but memory is one of my natural gifts. A friend once put it, Jim Valliant has memorized the whole of history by heart. And it does surprise me even how I can remember whole sentences and paragraphs, whole poems verbatim after one reading. And it's very helpful when you're a historian, believe me, to have a really, really good memory. And so I can give myself let's put it this way. When I give myself the instruction to remember, it is photographic. But I can give myself the instruction to forget. And if it doesn't have salience for me, I may just forget. So no, it's not a photographic memory, or what they call a eidetic memory. But when I want to remember something, I remember something. And that is one of my bizarre qualities. My psychologist buddy, he's a psychologist who works for the San Diego County Psychiatric Hospital. He says, Jim, you are neurologically unconventional. And I thought that was a nice way to put it in euphemistic form, both my foibles and my talents.
Well, I've certainly never heard of this. I've heard of eidetic memory, and my understanding is that there's no such thing as actual photographic memory. It's more like you have a lingering image of something for a while and then it goes away.
I am not one of these savants who can look at something just once and then do this amazing drawing of it from memory without seeing it again, down to the little details of the spires on the cathedral and so forth. No, I don't have an image memory. Well, maybe it's because I'm not an artist. I can't reproduce, I have no skills in terms of reproducing images. On the other hand, in my head, there does appear to be an image, and it appears to be exact. It's like I'm correcting my own impression by looking at that. So I don't know what they call a photographic memory. I'm certainly no neurophysiologist or psychiatrist on the topic. I just know I have a darn good memory.
Do you associate your memories with a particular day or like year, or are they just pop into your head when you think of it and you don't know like when it occurred to you or when you read it?
I can almost always tell you exactly when I had the memory. I can often locate it to the season, the month.
You've heard of Mary Lou Henner and autobiographical memory, where they can. I mean, I feel like I have a weak version of that. I have a good memory, but I do tie it into things that were going on that day.
Well, see, I think conceptualization is a key to it. If I didn't organize my data in a conceptual way, let's take history, the topic we're talking about, Dark Ages, Renaissance, Enlightenment. Those terms conjure up for me thousands of details. And it is only by organizing those details in such a way that I can access them that I think they are accessible. Does that mean that I don't also have just sheer out of the blue, oh yeah, that memory a lot? I do. But most of it really is the conceptual organization of our knowledge that makes it easy to access. That's my belief.
This sounds like Rand's truck-like concepts. She said she experienced concepts like a truck coming towards her or something like that. Is that the way you?
Well, I hope to approximate that. I may not have Ayn Rand's absolute ability to do that, but I very much have psychoepistemologically attended to myself in just that way. Honestly, so that when a concept comes up in ethics, politics, history, that concept is the content of the concept, the full content of that concept, not some mere statement of its definition or some abstract relation to something else. No, 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 no. The Renaissance is the paintings of Leonardo da Vinci, the science of Copernicus, Columbus discovering America, the Reformation going on, the printing press going in full swing, all these concretes that are now, and then I summon up the dates. Well, it was in the 1850s that Constantinople fell and the printing press was invented. And it was, by 1500, you've got Columbus and Da Vinci working in full steam. So all those little details are suddenly summoned up as part of the concept. And so the concept of Renaissance hits me like the paintings of Leonardo da Vinci, the science of Copernicus, the printing press. Boom. That's what it is to me.
Do you ever notice false memories or like biases creeping into your concepts? And how do you deal with that potential?
Oh, every human being, and this is absolutely true about every human being, our memories are subject to being altered all by themselves without any willful act on our part, simply through suggestion, later suggestion. You talk to other people who have a different memory of the thing, and it can actually reshape your own memory. Psychiatrists and neurologists have pointed this out for decades. And as a prosecutor, as a trial lawyer, I very much had to deal with with eyewitnesses and experts who would talk about the reliability of eyewitnesses and their memories. This is why contemporaneous recording is one of the best ways to solidify good memories. Right then and there, or as close to the event as possible, without any influence from someone else, write down an account of the event or the important facts of the event that will summon the memory back. And that you can rely on as a stronger memory than, say, something 3 years later when I'm trying to remember what happened at the party 3 years earlier. Was he holding that, or did she take that from me? That kind of thing. It literally can be influenced. And I can't say I notice it in myself, but being aware of it as an issue in people, I am self-conscious about it. That is to say, was my memory influenced by the discussion I later had with someone else about the event? Because, humans are so susceptible to having their actual memories reshaped as time wears on, especially by things like discussions and other associations.
Absolutely. Even watching a video of myself or even a recording like this tends to solidify it in the mind more.
Exactly. That's what's wonderful about a contemporaneous recording. I can always go back now to this tape to know exactly, well, did I say that to them? And I can go back and say, oh, well, that's what I said to them. And whether it was clear in my mind or not. Because one reason why I'm eager to say I don't have, even if there is no such thing as a photographic memory is just there are some things that are hard sometimes for me to summon. So things that are just not quite accessible to me, either, as I say, because I had given myself the instruction, don't remember this, or that completely lost all relevance and saliency for me. There was no real reason to remember it. And so it just faded into the background of other common facts.
Does having this great memory affect your selection of what to observe? Like, do you consciously avoid certain things because you don't want to have a memory of it?
No, I don't. When I consciously avoid something, it may be because I don't want the experience of it, not necessarily the memory of it. It's not to avoid, post-traumatic stress, I guess, or I guess it's more to avoid post-traumatic stress that might affect my memory, rather than worrying that I'll have this painful memory. I try to preserve painful memories. Those are exactly again, psychologists have pointed out that we automatically suppress, and it becomes an automatized repression if there are extremely painful memories. That's exactly what our brain will try and protect, or its mind will try to protect us from re-experiencing that pain by trying to, just sink the memory into the memory hole, forever memory hole. I'm not a big believer in dissociative or, reconjured memories, but I'll tell you, I myself have had an experience where, in the course of some kind of psychotherapy, a memory that was painful from childhood had to be re-experienced, and it was an emotional experience. I didn't, for years, the memory wasn't really accessible to me. And I realized in retrospect that it was a sort of a self-defense mechanism that was protecting me from that memory. So again, we have to be crucially self-conscious of human tendencies in this regard. Absolutely, absolutely. Even people who have so-called eidetic memories will have psychologically repressed memories, in my mind, because of the pain that can be associated with them.
And I think it's important to reevaluate those experiences. And if you have a sort of truck-like abstraction ability, it'll be easier to reevaluate those memories because you can see them better and understand them.
Amen. Amen. And you're absolutely right. It was even at the time, the psychiatrist who was taking me through this sort of, I'd volunteered as a guinea pig for a psychiatrist at a psychological meeting, right, of shrinks. And so they put me under a kind, it wasn't hypnosis, but a kind of mental thing with certain lights and stuff. And it really had the effect of drawing out this childhood memory. Even the psychiatrist there said, wow, it usually doesn't come up with such vivid, detailed memories. So when I did access it, it was very detailed, vivid, and so emotionally hurtful, I think I was remembering it correctly.
Now, you mentioned that in your trial lawyer experience, you had to deal with witnesses who had some sort of false memory or bias.
Well, every time there's eyewitnesses, and if you're relying on eyewitnesses, the defense will very frequently call a psychiatrist to the stand who's an expert on all of these memory studies. And so they can discuss how the effect of stress helps memory to a certain degree, increases saliency, whether the stress is positive or negative. You can actually do a graph on a curve on a graph. As stress increases, either positive or negative, actually our memory increases in its quality. But there comes a point where the stress is so great, I point the gun 2 inches from your face, you panic and blank out. That's when memory quality will fall off on the other side of the curve, is when there's too much stress, a traumatic stress. And so they will bring to light all the relevant psychiatric and cognitive science data on this, so that the jury, to undermine in effect their reliance on the eyewitness. This is why, in my view, circumstantial evidence, they always put down circumstantial evidence. Well, circumstantial evidence is the stuff that doesn't come from an eyewitness who saw it. Circumstantial evidence requires an inference. It's footprints, fingerprints, DNA. That circumstance, recently stolen property in your pocket. That kind of circumstantial evidence is actually the most powerful, more powerful than eyewitnesses, in my view, because eyewitnesses can be mistaken. They can have biases. And so I will look for that physical evidence to corroborate that important circumstantial evidence, which is always dissed as mere circumstantial evidence, but of course is always the most powerful of evidence. In addition to eyewitnesses, I don't think to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt, you can do it merely on a he said, she said basis. I think that's automatic built-in doubt. So if I'm relying on just one eyewitness, I'm not going forward. But nonetheless, to the extent that prosecutors rely on eyewitnesses, there are experts who will be called by the defense to help undermine their credibility, even in an innocent way. They could have made an innocent mistake. Look at all these errors that human memory are subject to. For example, later suggestions can change your memory of the event. So they'll ask, did you talk to other people who were there? Oh, and they love that, because the psychiatrist will then say, they talked to other witnesses? Well, there we have a high degree of, a chance of corrupted memories.
Right. I like your connection between stress and bias. Another thing that I was thinking about, and which came up in the Derek Chauvin trial, I know we had an online debate about that at some point, but we don't have to get into whether you think Chauvin was innocent or guilty. I want to talk to you about perspective bias, which is one of the defenses used by Chauvin's lawyer, Mr. Nelson. He says that the perspective that you got from the viral video created a bias. And the witnesses therefore thought that Chauvin was suffocating Mr. Floyd. But throughout the trial, he tried to prove otherwise. What do you think about
I have to say, it was that EMT, right? That lady who was just basically begging them, yeah, can I help you? Please stop what you're doing. And then she said, oh, and every day I have to live with the idea that I didn't do more to save him. Boy, what emotionally powerful testimony, but dangerous for exactly the reason you say. It's so emotionally powerful, and you're seeing it in effect from her eyes. It looks like the cop has his knee on this guy's neck against the concrete. And just seeing that and seeing it for 8 or 9 minutes, my God, it's going to leave a vivid emotional impression. I knew the officer was doomed when that video and that testimony came out, regardless of the battle of the experts over cause of death. In other words, the jury wasn't really going to care if there was actually a reasonable doubt as to cause of death. I mean, there was enough drugs in his system to have killed him by themselves. Is that a reasonable doubt as to cause of death? Right on the face of it, you might say the cop may have been guilty of some assault or some excessive force, but if he wasn't specifically the cause of death, then he couldn't be guilty of a homicide. And if there's enough drugs to have killed someone in their system anyway, by that means, asphyxiation, then do we have a reasonable doubt? Technically speaking, I thought there was a reasonable doubt, at least to a homicide charge. In my mind, the cop did do more than he had to do. It was excessive force. So sanction the cop, maybe even convict him for some kind of assault. But unless they could prove beyond a reasonable serious standard, if you think it probably is that the cop was the cause of death, but have a doubt, just a doubt that's based in the evidence, you must vote not guilty. Yes, you think he's very probably guilty, but there's this reasonable doubt, you should be a not guilty. So in my mind, was there at least a reasonable doubt as to cause of death and therefore any homicide charge? As an experienced prosecutor, I would say yes. Now, were the emotions, did the cop do something that looked like egregious excessive force? Yes. And was that emotionally impactful? Yes. And the emotions, I think, are what decided this more than anything else, as well as the public pressure, by the way. I mean, you had Maxine Waters saying, I demand a first-degree murder conviction, and if not, we need more violent demonstrations. Given that kind of social pressure on the poor jury, the judge, in my mind, erred significantly by not sequestering the jury, keeping them away from any such press. Also, in changing the venue, we could have moved it out of town and gotten at least a little more objective a jury. But no, I think the judge erred in not moving the location of the trial and in not sequestering.
Erred or wanted to make sure the jury was properly intimidated?
I will give the benevolent benefit of the doubt to the judge, but it could create, in my view, an issue on appeal. Chauvin may have a good basis to get a new trial if the appellate courts agree that, given the intensity of the public discussion, to put it mildly, it should have been a sequestered jury, for example, sequestered away from the press so that they didn't have a chance to see Maxine Waters' statements, for example.
I could do a whole show on legal reform. Go ahead, William.
Yeah.
I'm
again, as a former DA, I could talk about this all day long. I love it.
Well, I'm certainly glad to hear your opinion, because I agree. I think there was reasonable doubt in that case, and what we witnessed was a grotesque display of injustice.
Well, what really gets to me is the mob mentality that so many of these cases have. The cop must be the bad guy. And even if the cop is guilty of excessive force, it's that whole mob with the pitchforks and torches that really undermines the possibility of justice. And then the other thing is when you have government officials, before the jury has come back, stating their opinion on the case. That's wrong. It was wrong when Obama did it, when he said that the cops who arrested that Harvard professor did a dumb thing. It was wrong when Obama did it. It was wrong when Trump did it. giving his personal opinion on cases. Government officials, in my mind, should keep their big fat mouths shut on what their opinion on a pending criminal case until the jury has spoken. And Maxine Waters did worse, in my mind, than either Obama or Trump in this regard. Right as the jury is going out, she's saying first degree or nothing, or we're going to get more violent. Wow.
Well, and at the very least, it should be a single standard. You know, it shouldn't just be one side that's able to go out and do that. Ideally, it'd be none.
None. Yes, exactly. But surely the press was giving a megaphone to only one side of that debate too. I mean, right. NBC, MSNBC, CNN, the New York Times. It was clear what side they were on all along.
Yeah. Well, maybe we should move on to your new book, Creating Christ, which I just read and thought was really amazing.
Thank you. It was the product of 30 years of historical research.
Yeah, you can really tell because you put a lot of effort into that, and the connections you made between all the coins and all the propaganda and the Gospels and the historian Josephus. It's just an amazing matrix of objective connections you've made, and I applaud you on your work. It's pretty amazing.
Thank you. I did intend for it to be an inductive exercise, in fact, the objectivist theory of scientific induction. And so we believed it had to be interdisciplinary. We had to marshal all the evidence from every field to get what objectivists call that, horizontal integration, not merely the vertical integration. And so I was very pleased that it is, I hope, a sort of a laboratory case study in how to think inductively about history. Roman propaganda were all over it, and it's sort of been sitting under our noses for 2,000 years. That was the other thing. We had so much evidence from so many fields that all pointed in the same direction, and a common sense direction, that it was really overwhelming. Yeah.
So the theme basically is that the Roman Empire wanted this new Christian movement to succeed because it would help Roman philosophy mingle with Judaism.
Well, there was this big war in the first century, a cataclysmic, apocalyptic war between Jews and the Roman Empire. Jews in Judea and indeed throughout the empire were potentially rebelling against Rome for an independent Jewish state. And it was religious in basis. It was the messianic prophecies found in Hebrew scripture that contemporary historians back in the first and second centuries themselves said, both pagans and Jews, said it was the messianic prophecies that most inspired what was clearly a hopeless war against the Roman Empire. It was the war that reduced the temple to the Wailing Wall that it is today. It was in that war, it may have cost up to 1 million lives. Tens of thousands of slaves were brought into Rome, formerly Messianic Jews. And there were Jews living throughout the Roman Empire. And so the Romans did what the Romans normally do in such conflicts. They engaged not only in a physical war, but an ideological war. And when you read the New Testament, what we call Christianity, the earliest documents of Christianity, it is plain that it is a critical response to the militant, nationalist, Torah Orthodox Jewish rebels of the first 2 centuries. Everything in the New Testament is a diametrical opposite, a direct answer to those Jewish rebels. Render unto Caesar. Pay your taxes to Rome, in other words. We were told that it was taxes that first started the Jewish revolt. Jesus befriends tax collectors. Jesus says of a Roman centurion, not just a Roman, but a Roman centurion in this age of rebellion, that he has more faith than any Israelite, than any Jew. Jesus says, peace, 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 turn the other cheek, go the extra mile for Romans, love your enemy. Jesus, over and over, he attacks Torah orthodoxy, and And the whole thing is a conversion of the Messiah, making the Messiah a non-political concept. Jesus says, "My kingdom is not of this earth." The stories in the New Testament go out of their way to exonerate the Romans and collectively blame the Jews. The Jews throughout the Dark Ages got the blame by Christians for killing Jesus, precisely because the Gospels go out of their way to specifically blame the Jews. Judas betrays him. The Sanhedrin convicts him of violating Mosaic law. Pilate says he's innocent in all four Gospels. It's only a Jewish crowd demanding, a rebellion-like Jewish crowd demanding Jesus be crucified, that forces Pilate to try and avoid a riot right there and just say, okay, I'll crucify this Jesus guy. Against his will, a very melodramatically washes his hands. It's a Roman centurion who says, this truly was the Son of God. In the earliest Christian literature, we're told to obey the Roman state as God's appointed agents on earth. The rebellion is a sin. Slaves are told on 4 or 5 occasions to obey their masters, even harsh ones. Concepts found on Roman coinage, clear religious political Roman propaganda, right? Includes things like Pax Orbis Terrarum, that is to say, peace on earth, or Concordia, Harmonia, goodwill among men. So the very concepts in the New Testament echo the political propaganda that you'll find on Roman coins at the time. So it struck me as an initial hypothesis, at least, that that was a string that I should be pulling. Could the New Testament, in fact, be, in effect, an ideological response by the Roman state and by the pro-Roman Jews to counter the messianic Jewish rebels of the first 2 centuries, who were militant, nationalistic, Torah orthodox, all the things that Christianity undoes about Judaism.
Do you think that regarding the motives of creating Christianity, do you think it was the Romans trying to syncretically, if that's a word, combine their philosophy with Judaism in order to pacify the Jews? Or do you think it was more like the Jews wanting to survive and therefore reforming their religion in order to be better servants to the Romans?
Well, Rabbinic Judaism was already doing that. The new school of, after the Jewish War and the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, the priestly establishment at Jerusalem, the religious establishment of organized Judaism, was shattered. A new school was founded at a place called Yavne, which by a Yohanan ben Zakkai, who's considered the father of Rabbinic Judaism. So non-Christian Rabbinic Judaism was already taming itself, de-emphasizing Messiah, recognizing the Roman emperors as the true messiahs, and trying to get along with the Roman Empire. Now, there were other Jews who I think were looking for a whole, even more radical way of assimilating into the Roman world. Recall that Christianity really undercuts some fundamental features of Judaism. Kosher diet, circumcision, strict Sabbath observance were all now no longer required, according to the New Testament. So all of the essential features that distinguish Judaism are no longer required of Christians. So I think there were Jews who were trying to assimilate into Greco-Roman culture even more thoroughly than the rabbinic school at Yavne, who kept the Mosaic law, basically, even though they were trying to be pro-Roman themselves. So Christianity represents an even more radical step, a shift in Messianic Judaism itself into a more Hellenized, pro-Roman version. So I think there are 2 things going on with Christianity. I think there are high-ranking Jews who are cooperating with the Roman Empire at the highest level. The Roman emperors Vespasian and Titus were close friends with many Jewish leaders. And take, for example, the family of the philosopher Philo from Alexandria. They were close friends of that philosopher's family. And so there were high-ranking Jews who were trying to find a way to be still Jewish and yet fit in with the Roman Empire more. And Christianity certainly met the bill for them. But also, I think that Romans were looking to recondition the Jewish slaves to be better, more cooperative slaves, as opposed to the former rebels that they were. So they were trying to redirect messianism in a whole new direction. In fact, if you read the New Testament, the basic theme is you guys, you Jews who rebelled, basically got the concept of Messiah all wrong, ended up killing the true Messiah, Jesus, who was an advocate of peace and paying your taxes, and therefore you got what was coming to you in the Jewish war. And that's exactly how Christians viewed it thereafter. The Jews were punished for killing Jesus and lost the Jewish war. That's how all early Christians looked at it. Origen, Eusebius, Augustine, Jerome, you name it. All of them uniformly looked at the Jewish war, the loss by the Jews of the Jewish war, as God's punishment for their killing the true peaceful Messiah, Jesus. So it was doing two things. It was trying to pacify the formerly militant Messianic Jews, who were now Roman slaves in great numbers, and tame them as slaves, I think, as well as being a propagandistic ideological response. It wasn't altogether successful. There was a second Jewish rebellion in the 2nd century. So at least initially, it wasn't altogether successful, as I say. But surely it was very convenient for high-ranking friends, Jewish friends of Roman officials who wanted to really assimilate. So I think there were multiple motives behind it. But the one thing both motives have in common is that it's an ideological response to the rebels, a sort of redirecting Judaism in a more pro-Roman way. And this had to have been directed to some degree, in my view, by the Roman government itself, as well as those high-ranking, well-educated, high-ranking Jewish merchants and politicians who were eager to cooperate with the Roman Empire and were looking for ways to positively assimilate into Roman classical culture. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I'm one thing I liked about your portrait of the Jews is that there were these two factions. One was, I guess, the Essenes, or the ones who are more inclined to reject the empire, and then they were like the militant wing, and then there were the Pharisees. I can't remember if that was. Mm-hmm. Was it the Pharisees? Yeah, the Pharisees, they wanted to integrate or assimilate with the Romans, and they were more pacifist.
Right.
And so
Rabbinic Judaism. Yeah.
Yeah. So I see this as like a difference between a difference with tactics. Like they disagreed about the tactics of how to preserve their culture.
I don't think it's easily reduced to a mere tactical or strategic position. I think that the tactical positions certainly motivated them emotionally and psychologically. But I think that it's a little anachronistic to divorce religion from their thinking. I think that these people were mystics. I think that, for example, contemporary Jews did need an explanation. I mean, think about it. If we're right, and if our God, the one God, is the one almighty creator God, why on earth should polytheists ever defeat us in battle? God can't be rewarding them. No, we must have done something wrong. We must somehow have broken the covenant with God. Otherwise, God wouldn't be punishing us. For surely, if we're right about our God being the one almighty God, we should always prevail against these idol-worshiping polytheists. So I think Jews needed a theological explanation as much as a political explanation for what happened. And I think on the other side, too, Romans were happy to understand that they were the divinely favored side, and that even perhaps the Jewish God, insofar as he was valid, had gone over to their side.
And yeah, so, they must have seen their triumph over the Jews as divine providence.
They did. The Roman state was a sacred thing, and their conquest of the world they regarded as divinely motivated. The gods had intended them all along to rule the world. Obviously, just look at what happened. So if there's no division in your mind between religion and politics, church and state, which there was none back in those days, every government action by the Roman state had to have a religious understanding and justification. You had to take the auspices and auguries to see what the gods would think about your decision. The same was true by Jews, Egyptians, and every other religious group at the time. And there were varying degrees of literal commitment to those religions, but 2,000 years ago, everybody needed a religious explanation.
Now, you mentioned how they had to redefine the word Messiah itself.
Exactly.
And that makes me think of conservatism and how we might have to redefine conservatism. What do you think about that connection? Do you think that we should be focusing on trying to redefine conservatism?
No. I don't think that the term conservative is in itself worth saving. I think that that I'm more likely, let me put it this way. I think we are more likely to find political allies, especially for ad hoc issue bases, on the right, among conservatives, among libertarians. On the other hand, I think that what's crucial is a recalibration altogether of the defense of America and the free market. If by what we mean conservatism is a defense of the American founding ideas and the founding fathers and individual liberty and individual rights and the free market, then absolutely it would serve us to abandon the idea that we're the past, we're the future. Capitalism is an unknown ideal that has never really existed, and that scientific and cultural progress hinge on a true capitalist society. So conceptually, I think we were better served in abandoning the concept of conservatism in favor of concepts like radical for capitalism or just liberal or classical liberal. Those concepts are more aligned, I think, with our strong selling points. And we do have to sort of shake out the religion and tradition of conservatism. And I don't think that's served by adopting the term. Now, on the other hand, I agree with you. We're more likely to find on an issue-to-issue basis allies on the right than on the left. These days especially. I mean, back in the old days, when Democrats actually defended free speech, we'd find allies on certain issues on the left. Now the left has abandoned any real liberalism in favor of, authoritarianism. They don't defend, they have their own racism, they have their own censorship, they have their own kind of authoritarianism. So I agree, it's on the right that we will tend to find more allies on an issue-to-issue basis. But still, I don't think the term conservatism is worth saving. No.
Yeah, I'm not for the term per se, but just actually whatever term you change it to, they're just going to call it bigoted anyway.
Right. No, they love McCain and Romney after they've no longer running for president.
That's right.
They were running for president. Oh, they were monsters too, weren't they?
Exactly. Romney had his binders full of women.
Right. And when a Democrat says in effect the same thing, they're a hero. That's Romney would be some kind of weird sexist because he's trying to find women for office. It's utterly bizarre.
No, they'd have. Go ahead.
Well, if you're going to continue on that subject, go ahead. I have another question about your book.
Sure.
So, in your book, you talk about how Josephus relays the story of the chariots and the troops in the clouds.
Yeah.
And that's one of the prophecies in the New Testament.
Indeed.
Or is it the Old Testament?
Well, kind of both. There is one of the latest works of ancient Hebrew scripture is a book of prophecy attributed to Daniel. It was written much after the historical life of Daniel would have been, scholars have identified. But this book, Daniel, contains messianic prophecies. And in the messianic prophecy there, Daniel envisions symbolic beasts and a symbolic Son of Man coming in glory in the clouds. And that is a symbolic statement, actually, of the earthly triumph of Israel expected when the Messiah should come. That prophecy very much motivated the Jewish rebels. That was one of those prophecies that motivated the whole Jewish rebellion. And the leaders of the Jewish rebellion were all messianic claimants claiming to be this political leader sent by God in fulfillment of Daniel. Now, that prophecy gets used in the New Testament. Jesus says, according to the Gospels, now, Jesus says, according to the Gospels, that Jerusalem will be destroyed, the temple will be destroyed, and he has vivid details of, in effect, the Jewish war to come. Not one stone will be left upon another in the temple, for example, which matches the description Josephus gives it after the event. This has led many scholars to believe that the Jesus prophecy was written after the Jewish war because it's aware of details about the war that were only known after the war. And so, like most prophecies, such as Daniel's prophecies about Nebuchadnezzar, were written after the actual events and thrown back in time to make it seem like a prophecy.
I like to...
But there can be one last thing on that.
Sure.
There can be no question that Jesus says in the prophecy, you'll see the Son of Man coming in glory in the clouds. Josephus himself, now he's a Roman, he's working for the Romans writing his history. So he's a Roman propagandist, although he's a Jew who switched sides, went over to the Roman side. And as gone over to the Roman side, he now writes the history saying, I'm still a good Jew, but I'm writing for the Romans. I'm working for Vespasian and Titus, the Roman emperors. He describes armies in the clouds being seen at the time of the Jewish war. So he believes the Jewish war was a messianic advent, only he says that the true Messiah was, now get this, Vespasian, the Roman emperor. So to him, it is the Daniel prophecy, but being fulfilled at the siege of Jerusalem in 70, but pointing to Vespasian being the Messiah. Jesus leaves that open. Jesus suggests that there will be a glorious coming of the Son of Man at the time of the Jewish war. In my view, and in the view of another scholar, Joseph Atwell, Jesus' prophecy is a proof text for the Flavian imperial claim. No one else could have been the successful Prince of Peace who came to rule the world at that moment, but Vespasian and his son Titus, so that Jesus' prediction can only be a validation of these Roman imperial claims. More Roman fingerprints, if you will, suggesting that Josephus may well himself have been in on the entire gospel project, for they surely needed a well-educated Jewish historian like that to help them construct the New Testament.
I'm certainly convinced that the story in the New Testament was written after the war.
Yeah.
And it was trying to, but my question is, why would they do something like that? I think it's because they saw a natural phenomenon. I think, have you heard of something called a superior mirage?
So we could be seeing the armies reflected up in the sky, is what you're saying, and it was just a mirage.
Yeah, recently I saw an article about a ship on the water, on the ocean, that appeared to be floating above the ocean, and they took a picture of it.
Right.
And they described it in all these articles as a superior mirage, and it's this weird natural phenomenon that happens when there's temperature differences in the layers of the atmosphere.
Oh, it's the classic desert mirage phenomena, where you see an actual oasis, only it's 10 times further away because the atmosphere is being distorted by the heat. Absolutely. That's what a mirage technically is. Now, I would be more inclined to this kind of natural explanation were it not for the pre-existence of Daniel. In other words, our Jewish rebels, long before the Jewish war broke out, were expecting a fulfillment of Daniel. They were expecting glory in the clouds. Now, if the rebels themselves were expecting glory in the clouds, and then Jesus and Josephus say, oh yes, there was glory in the clouds, they have another motive for saying there was glory in the clouds, to point to another Messiah. Jesus is clearly not doing it to predict a natural phenomenon. He's clearly saying it to say, this will be a Son of Man advent. That is his motive in saying that's why it will happen. And he's doing it in a predictive form. So it's really dubious. But let me suggest that armies seen fighting in the clouds because of the specific messianic expectation, because of the pre-existing prophecy in Daniel, which by then was already 200 years old, suggests that it was not a natural phenomenon, but far more likely to be a politically motivated pointer to a messianic advent.
I was just asking because you made one of your points in your book was to take the words literally. And so you say, we're just going to look at this at face value, what they're saying, and try to make sense of it. So that's what I'm trying to do with the troops in the clouds.
When we say face value, no, to be quite clear, yeah, we will take, we're not going to be mystics. That is to say, we won't take literally all the reports. That would be turning ourselves into suckers who believe any eyewitness. No, taking it at face value means we're taking what they say as what they said at face value. So, for example, when Jesus says that the Roman centurion has more faith than any Jew, we will take at face value not his evaluation being correct, but that the document has a political agenda.
I see.
No, we take at face value not that Jesus committed or performed miracles, for example, or resurrected from the dead. Surely that's not what we mean. We always opt for a natural explanation. But the natural explanation for the armies in the clouds, I think, has more to do with Daniel and the rebels' expectations than any mirage in the sky.
Now, one aspect of this was all the coins you had that you looked at all the images on the coins and you made a connection between some Flavian issues and the early Christian symbol of the anchor and the fish.
Yes.
And I was wondering, it seems to me that the fish wouldn't be a graven image because it doesn't technically represent the god. It represents the subjects who are coming to God. Was that a misinterpretation?
Well, let's go back to the history of the whole image. The Christians did not invent the anchor and fish image. In fact, a Christian writing around the year 200, Saint Clement of Alexandria, recommends fishes and anchors as Christian seals. And he identifies the source as being the Seleucid. Let me get into that for a second. The Seleucid anchor. Go back 300 years before Christ, when Alexander conquered the Near East. In the wake of Alexander's death, Greek generals now controlled the countries of Egypt, Syria, Iraq,
right.
And now we call this period the Hellenistic period because that's when Greek culture spread out from Greece, thanks to the conquests of Alexander, all around the Middle and Near East. And the Seleucids were one of these Greek dynasties of kings who were basically ruling in what is today northern Iraq and Syria. And they had a kingdom, the Seleucids. They were Greek, so they claimed to be descendants of Apollo. And Apollo, we're told by Homer, once converted himself into a dolphin. So if you go to Delos, the Greek island that is supposed to be the place of birth of Apollo, you'll find the oldest examples of a dolphin wrapped around the anchor. This is a clear image depicting Apollo, the pagan god. When the Seleucid kings claimed to be descendants of Apollo in their propaganda, they adopted the exact same image as their own. So the Seleucid anchor with the fish wrapped around it is a clear graven image. We know that the fish is part of the graven image. Why? Because, again, Jewish coins, when the Hanukkah rebellion happened and Jews established an independent kingdom in the 2nd century BC from the Seleucids, they achieved independence from the Seleucids, set up the last independent Jewish kingdom of the ancient world. They issued coins, and when they issued coins, they copied sometimes Seleucid images like the anchor, only they left the fish off altogether. Why? Because the fish would have implied it was an image of a god, the god Apollo. So Jews left the fish off and only showed anchor. Now, when Titus becomes emperor, he becomes the first emperor to adopt the Seleucid dolphin and anchor image. And you see the dolphin wrapped around the anchor. No previous emperor, and only briefly later one emperor, used this image at all. But it was an image for himself. He would have a picture of himself on one side of the coin and the dolphin anchor on the other. So he was making a similar claim that other Roman emperors had made since the time of Augustus. Augustus also claimed to be a son of Apollo. Now, he didn't use the dolphin and anchor image, Titus did, but obviously he is hearkening to the Seleucids and to Apollo. To Jews, that dolphin wrapped around that anchor would have been a graven image, declaring not only an image of Apollo, but in effect agreeing that Titus is a man god associated with the god Apollo. That context is why it is simply extraordinary that the anchor and dolphin image should be adopted by Christians as their earliest images. In the Catacombs, which are our earliest physical evidence of Christianity at all, our earliest physical evidence of Christianity's existence are the images scrawled in these Christian burial grounds around Rome called the Catacombs. The oldest of these catacombs is actually the burial spot for the granddaughter of Vespasian and the niece of Titus. Her burial sepulcher is identified as being both Flavian and the earliest Christian site. How? By means of the use of dolphins and fish. Now,
it's an interesting.
The Christians would use it both ways. They would have the dolphin wrapped around the anchor. That clearly was a symbol for Jesus. When the fish are separated from the anchor, that is clearly the Christian devotee. Remember, in the New Testament, Jesus says to Peter, I will make you a fisher of men. So the fish could represent, but Jesus himself is often represented in a fish symbol because the Greek word ichthus, for fish, is also an anagram, a word game on Jesus' own name, Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. So the fish represents Jesus himself in Christian symbolism, but it can also represent the Christian devotee and convert, depending on whether the fish is wrapped around the anchor or whether it's merely attending the anchor. And it can be found in Christian use in the 2nd and 3rd centuries when the anchor and the fish is far more common a symbol than the cross. For Christians, it was only after Constantine in the 4th century that the cross overtook anchors and fish as the most common symbol used by Christians. Now, even pagan Romans had separated out fish from the anchor. We have frozen with the eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD. We have a mosaic frozen in time from the Flavian period. Right in the midst of the Flavian period, a pagan Roman mosaic with an anchor and then both fish and people juxtaposed to the anchor. So in other words, the fish represent people seeking the safety of the cross. The same symbolic imagery as would be used by Christians later on, being used by Flavian pagans. So the anchor and the fish had already been separated, both by pagans and by Jews. But it was still the same image. And Christians like Clement of Alexandria, writing around 200, had no problem understanding that the Christian anchor was the Seleucid anchor. That's what he called it.
The symbology is fascinating to me, and how the fish originally represented a deity, and in a couple steps they turned it into the worshiper of the deity,
or both. Or have a wonderful image, for example, that we reproduce in the book of Jesus being, Jesus is the Eucharist. He is the communion of the Last Supper. Jesus says, drink the wine, it is my blood. Eat the bread, it is my body. Catholics have believed that when the priest does Mass, he actually converts, physically transforms the wine into the blood of Jesus and the wafer into the body of Christ. And it literally transforms. So Jesus is, in effect, the communion meal. some of our earliest representations of the communion have a fish there, along with the bread and the wine. Jesus is the fish too, in Christian usage. As I say, people are very aware of you'll see it on bumper stickers or in the back of cars, that little fish, primitive fish symbol.
Right.
It means Jesus. It's an anagram for Jesus's titles. Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior, comes out to ichthus, fish. Now,
so there's this integration.
Yeah, it can be either, the fish can be either Jesus or the follower. In Christian usage and in pagan usage, by the way, when they use anchors and fish.
See, one of the thoughts rolling around in my brain is that the Romans had a religion for emperors, for rulers, for leaders, for the upper class. And the Jews had a religion for kings and monarchs and basically the upper class. But there was no religion for the lower class. And I think maybe Christianity was the religion for the lower class, and that's why you have the fish turning into possibly a god or possibly the worshiper.
No. The upper class is responsible for the literature. The upper class is responsible for engineering the religions in these cases. The lower classes, though, were faithful devotees. Let me correct an impression you have. The imperial cult of Rome was widely popular, and popular not among the aristocrats, the senators, but popular among the masses. People think of the Roman Republic, for example, as some kind of a representative democracy. No. The masses wanted the emperor. The people loved Julius Caesar. When Julius Caesar was assassinated, the people loved him. Julius Caesar paid the people's debts. He wanted popular agrarian reform. He opposed the rule of the Senate. The Senate were the wealthy aristocratic oligarchs who wanted to preserve the republic. Julius Caesar was so popular among the masses that the people, after his assassination, themselves set up an unofficial altar to his deification. The people did that first, and only later they had to clear that altar, but that was the spot in which the Senate agreed later to build the official temple to the divine Julius. The Senate were the slowpokes who only later acknowledged Julius Caesar's divinity, and the masses were the ones who were eager to call Julius Caesar a god, just as they were eager to call the emperor Augustus. Only the popular emperors got deified. Augustus, Claudius, Vespasian, Titus, all got deified. Tiberius, Caligula, Nero, they did not. Domitian, they did not. So the imperial cult may have been started by aristocrats, but it was for the masses, and it was mostly popular among the masses, not the senators and the aristocrats. So our popular view of that has been totally warped by Hollywood. The Republic was opposed by the masses in ancient Rome. It was the aristocrats who were defending the Republic. And Hollywood has completely lied to us about that, although good historians will set you straight on that. Furthermore, the Jewish rebellion itself was a vastly popular movement. So on the other side, what we're looking at is a grassroots Jewish movement. In fact, Josephus makes it plain that it was the poor, people who called themselves the poor, who were the leaders of the rebellion. Now that makes sense. People who were disaffected from Roman society and not doing so well would probably be more likely to join the rebellion. In fact, the Essenes called themselves the poor. That was one of their official titles for themselves. They shared all their property in common, just as the apostles do in the New Testament. So what we're looking at is a Christianity that is a pro-Roman version of Essene Christianity, if you will. But the Essenes identified themselves with the masses. So what we're looking at here are popular movements, sir. Now, these popular movements had leaders, intellectual leaders, even wealthy leaders on both sides. But this does not mean that those movements did not represent the popular religions of the time. They very much did, including the imperial cult.
what do you make of Jesus coming from, the underclass? He's supposed to be descended from David, from kings, but they tried to portray him more as a poor person, like a carpenter.
Right. Humble origin, no room at the end, all that.
Yeah, he's kind of presented as a poor person. Yeah. And that to me strikes me as why he would be a religion for the underclass. But I'm not settled on this. I'm curious what your view is.
As I pointed out, the poor are being targeted by the Jewish rebels. The rebels identify themselves as, quote, the poor. So Jesus himself has to be a convincing messianic figure that appeals to them and appeals to their existing ideology. Also, a very big fact you need to bear in mind is that Vespasian, the Roman general who defeated the Jews in the Jewish war and who claimed bizarrely to be the true Roman Jewish Messiah, the true Jewish Messiah is the Roman general who defeated the Jewish rebels, very paradoxically. Well, guess what? He featured his humble origins. He came from poor background. And he featured it in his propaganda. In fact, the biographer of Vespasian, Barbara Levick, the most recent scholarly biographer of Vespasian, refers to his propaganda as his ostentatious modesty. Ostentatious modesty. In other words, Vespasian and Titus, in fact, in Titus's biography, Suetonius points out that Titus pointed out what a humble little shack he was born in. And the site of Titus's nativity became a site of pilgrimage and veneration because he was born under such humble circumstances like Jesus was. So the idea that the Roman aristocrats would not be featuring for their own political propagandistic motives, remember, they're appealing to the masses self-consciously. So Roman emperors are the second dynasty of Roman emperors, these Flavians, who I say were involved in the creation of Christianity, themselves featured their humble origins as a positive part of their political propaganda. So it's a parallel between Jesus in the Gospels and the Roman emperors. Far from being something that shows that aristocrats were not involved, it does, however, you're right, show that they're appealing to the masses. But it was a sophisticated aristocratic appeal to the masses of the type that the Emperor Vespasian and the Emperor Titus were actively engaged in. In fact, Vespasian performs healing miracles identical to healing miracles Jesus is said to have performed in the Gospels.
Right.
There are all manner of parallels between the Flavians and Jesus as Jesus is presented in the Gospels that would have been unmistakable to contemporary ears. If you lived at the end of the first century, you would have known the imperial propaganda about the emperors. And if you read the Gospels, the connections with Vespasian and Titus would have been unmistakable.
One of the things I think I was missing, and you helped clarify, is that the Romans themselves appealed to the underclasses in order to,
all the time.
Yeah, in order to maintain power.
The emperors were more popular with the people, the masses, and the troops than they were with the senators and the old aristocratic families.
Right. And just switching subject now, have you seen Monty Python when the Life of Brian, when
one of my favorite films,
when it's revealed that he's the son of a Roman?
Yes. Get this, the Talmud, the earliest references to Jesus in the Talmud are rather late, but still the earliest references to Jesus in the Talmud say Jesus, this Christian Jesus guy, it ridicules Jesus, obviously, because it's the Talmud and they're not Christians. So they ridicule the virgin birth, they ridicule his divine claims to divinity. And the Talmud says Jesus was really not born of a virgin. He was born of a Roman soldier who had an affair with this Jewish girl. That is what Monty Python is getting it from.
Yeah, and when
I find it, the Talmud, not to be historically accurate, but sort of the Jews making a comment about what Christianity is. It's Roman.
So when I used to watch Monty Python in college a lot, and I still watch it every once in a while.
I love Python.
I would hear a reference in Monty Python. They're full of these obscure references sometimes.
Oh,
And
so well educated though.
and
Man.
then I would be watching something on TV, and then I would get the Monty Python reference that I heard a long time ago because I didn't get it at the time.
Right.
But now,
those guys were university students. Those guys were, one of them was going to be a lawyer, and one of them was. These were smart guys, and they knew history and they knew some philosophy, and that makes their humor all the funnier. The Holy Grail is just as funny as Life of Brian. It is a brilliant skewering of the romanticism of the Dark Ages, just as the Life of Brian is a brilliant political contextualization of Christianity, very much in line with what I think. My own product. See, as a historian, I tried to put Christianity into its historical context, just as historians do with everything else. Somehow Christianity gets an exception here. But once you put Christianity in its context, it clearly represents a critical reaction to the militant nationalist Jewish rebels of the first 2 centuries. And in a sort of a subtle way, the Life of Brian was getting at the same point. I don't think they understood it at that level, but boy, just their educated insights into that are very revealing and eloquent.
Yeah, I just wanted to let you know that now I'm in the position of reading your book and you pointing out that Celsus wrote that Jesus was the son of a Roman, or the illegitimate son of a Roman. And now I understand Monty Python.
Right. So. Celsus was a pagan writer. And it could be that the Talmud got it from Celsus, or Celsus got it from the Talmud. In either case, it's so late, 200 years on, and done by harsh critics of Christianity, that I don't regard it as historically accurate, but as a really interesting political connection and slam, if you will. Why are Celsus and the Talmud saying that Jesus was the son of a Roman soldier? Well, they're saying in code, in effect, Christianity is Roman, not Jewish.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think you nailed it. So I'm very glad I read your book, and I think it's very wonderful.
Very yeah, I think 100 years from now, I think this will just be regarded as simply the truth. Yeah. I think it's that powerful, that conclusive, our case. I think it'll take a while. The academic establishment is almost as difficult to overcome as the religious Orthodox establishment, and I have to overcome both. But I've been astonished at the reception. Leading scholars, nothing like objectivists. Professor Robert Eisenman, one of the leading, he's definitely a radical scholar, but one of the leading translators of the Dead Sea Scrolls, praised our book to the skies. Dr. Robert Price has praised our book, one of the leading mythicists in biblical scholarship. I thought, this book would just gather dust for decades, and maybe someone would, look at it later in the future and say, hey, this guy had a point or something. But I'm astonished at how much traction we're getting right now in the scholarship. A multi-part documentary series based on creating Christ should be out within the next year. COVID lockdown delayed production. But there are these award-winning documentarians, again, no objectivists, who want to they were going to do one documentary. It's now turned into a multi-part documentary series on our theory in creating Christ. It should be out in about a year.
That's great. I just want to take a different angle. I didn't have time to read it before the show, but you said in an interview about it that if it hadn't been for Christianity, another form of Neoplatonism would probably still have ended the classical world, which I tend to agree with. I was just curious at what point you think it could have been stopped. Before Constantine, during the Greek days?
Constantine, it was way too late by Constantine's time. Let me suggest it was way too late by the time the empire replaces the republic. Once the empire replaced the republic, there was a tendency on the part of the state, although Rome was comparatively tolerant and would allow the various ethnic groups within their empire their own religion and religious practices. There's no question that the government of Rome was seeking a religion to unify their diverse population, and that a monotheism was what they were tending towards, even in their Sol Invictus God. They were trying to put over a unifying monotheistic God. Also, the Neoplatonic philosophical tendency was already well entrenched, certainly by the first century. I tend to think that there's a big, I mean, even throughout the Hellenistic period, I think there's a slow retreat in Greek confidence. And by the Roman times, early in the Roman experience, the pre-empire period, you really have some people who love Aristotle and Greek thought for itself, like Cicero and Lucretius and things like that. But those guys are being replaced by real neo-mystics, like Seneca by the first century AD. So I do think it was the turn of the Common Era.
Okay.
That really was the last moment in which you kind of could have had a chance, either ideologically or politically, for a neo-Aristotelianism to compete with the rising trend toward mysticism and Neoplatonism.
That's
Christianity
good.
just was perfect. It matched exactly what the Roman state was looking for, and it was the best expression of Neoplatonism. Because let's face it, Jewish monotheism is far more consistent with Platonic dualism or Platonism in general than polytheism ever was. So Christianity just checked off all the boxes, and it was open to everybody, women, slaves. So given that it had opened the door to everybody in its membership, but it was very exclusive and intolerant about its monotheism, and given its perfect expression of Neoplatonism, given the fact that it itself was the product of Roman propaganda, it just checked off all the boxes. It was the form of Neoplatonism that would have taken over the Roman world and destroyed classical culture.
Well, it's great, fascinating stuff, James. We could have gone another 4 hours.
Yes,
we're going to have you back on the show. And now,
happy to come back.
Good. Well, we'll hold you to that. And but
no, these were great questions, guys.
Good.
I really like this conversation.
Good.
Thank you.
Well, we'll try to even amp it up from here for the next one. So, but it was great. You had a lot of great things to say. We didn't always agree, but I can appreciate where you're coming from. And again, I think you're still a model for others in ARI world to emulate. So
thank you so much. Thank you so much. I have no problem interacting with you, sir. I think anyone who's intolerant of you as such is probably a little close-minded.
I'll have to
have a discussion with you. Come on, that's close-minded.
I think I'll have to bring you around to some of my blockers. Well, that's great. Thank you so much. William, any final words?
Just a big thank you for coming on the show. I enjoyed talking to you a lot. And I look forward to your next project.
I am hoping to write a broader critique of Christianity and its history from our ideological perspective. This was really only step one, the origins of Christianity.
Great.
Well, I look forward to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, James. This is the Ayn Rand Fan Club. I'm Scott Schiff, and we will see you next time.